Hello, and I'm here today to show you some repairs we're going to do on this Poulan Wild Thing. I've had it for probably a little over 20 years, or about 20 years, and it's really been a pretty good saw over that time. I've rebuilt the carburetor once, I've replaced the bar and chain once, well, the chain several times, but the bar once, and I had to replace this side cover here one time. Today we're worried about the starting issue. It's been having trouble starting and staying running over the past year or so, and I just kind of set it aside. I haven't needed it, so I kind of set it aside. So today we're going to go through the carburetor again, and this time I'm going to take you guys with me and show you how I do it, what I do with the carburetor on these, to see if we can get it running. And one quick little tutorial here on how to start these. The Poulans are pretty much all the same. We have the on and off switch here, when it's clearly labeled up for on. And then you have your choke here, you can pull out all the way for choke. There's also a starting trick on these you need to know too. It has a trigger lock on it. So the best thing to do when you're first starting it cold is just to squeeze the trigger, push down this thumb button on the top and hold it and let it go. That holds the throttle on about halfway while it's choked and turned on. It makes it a little easier to start. And then we're going to pump the primer a few times until we feel resistance and we see that there's fuel in the primer ball. Now you gotta watch these primer balls. Sometimes they tend to crack. Then if they do, you have to buy another one. And they're probably $4 or $5 online. Pretty darn easy to change yourself. Not a big deal. And it's a rather simple layout on this saw. There are, what, 1, 2, 3 screws on top to take the top cover plate and air filter off. And these are Torx bit screws. Or you can use a large straight bit screwdriver on too. I got my Torx bit right there. It fits right in perfectly. And that is a size T25. But if you can see, it's also a slotted screw, so you can also, if you don't have a T25, you can fit a regular straight bit screwdriver in there and use that to undo it as well. Once you've loosened all 3 screws, you just carefully lift that up. Let's see, let's just set it aside with the screws right in it so we don't lose anything. And now we have very clear and easy access to the exhaust system, the spark plug, cylinder jug, and the carburetor area here. So all in all, this is a pretty easy saw to work on. We're going to remove the air filter pad and set that aside. And once we get that over there, we can see there's a couple of nuts right here holding the air filter base on, which we'll have to remove to get to the carburetor. And those look like they are 8mm. Let me go grab a wrench and we'll see. And I was right. That is 8mm. Those are 8mm nuts on there, which is also the same thing as 5/16. So I have a 5/16 inch nut driver. We're going to use that to undo both these nuts on here. And we'll set the whole base assembly aside with the nuts so we don't lose them. This slides right off easily, like that. I'll set that there. And now we've got the little guide tubes for the adjustment screws. They're on the side. You've got your high and low mixture adjustments, and you've got your idle speed setting screw here. And this just keeps all that stuff clean. It keeps dirt from getting in around those screws so you can adjust them. Set that aside. And now the choke lever just pops out of the arm just with a little push. It's just a little pressure fitting in there, and you can pop that right out. And now I left it hanging in there because it didn't seem to be hurting anything. I just picked it up out of its locked in position. I'm just going to leave it dangle there for now. And we're going to take the whole carburetor, we're going to pull it backwards until it clears the mounting bolt. We're going to twist it a little bit, and the throttle linkage will pop out if we twist it a little bit. Might help if I would have taken, it would have been easier if I would have taken the fuel lines off first, but it'll still work. So that's off, and now that exposes the fuel lines right here. And we're going to want to remember which way they go on, because it's important to put them on the right place. And if we pump the primer a few times, we can see which way the fuel flows. The fuel flows in through the top plate here where it says walbro, and it returns out through the lower one. So we'll just keep that in mind. Once we have the carburetor in our hand, I'm going to remove the 2 mixture screws. Usually I'll screw them down tight and count how many turns it takes to get them down tight, so I can remember to restart them at that point when I put it back together. If you have no idea where to start them at, you can check online. Sometimes you can find for your specific machine the best place, but almost always it's somewhere between 1 and 2 turns. I usually start about 1.5 turns out on each and then go from there. Then we're going to take the 4 screws off the bottom, the diaphragm cover, well, one of the diaphragm few, that's the actual pump down there, and we're going to take the big screw here out of the top. That's where the metering valve and some other things are at before we clean this up with the carb cleaner. Alright, we've got it disassembled now, and you can see I got the 2 adjustment screws here. I usually set them up so the low one is closest to me on the bottom, so to speak, and the high one is farthest away, which would be on top. So I got low and high sitting like that. Now this is the cover for the metering area here. Now this is the top cover, and this is the bottom fuel pump diaphragm here. We want to make sure that your diaphragm is nice and flexible and not brittle or cracked. And make sure that your little check valve flaps on here are not distorted, that they seem like they flex nice and easy and return to their original straight positions. You know, I always recommend people go ahead and spend $5 to $15 to buy a new carburetor gasket set anytime you take one of these apart and clean it, because that's a better way of doing it. And you might say, well, gee, I can go online and get a whole brand new carburetor for $10 to $20. And that's true. A lot of times you can now. But unless your carburetor is like totally gunked up and really in bad shape, honestly, you're better off rebuilding the original. If it's an older piece of equipment now, you're better off rebuilding the original carburetor than you are replacing it with one of the cheap made in China or wherever carburetors are selling for $10 or $12. Because honestly, those really aren't that good. And the ones they're making nowadays don't have usually the range of adjustments that the older ones do. They're just not as good of a quality build. A lot of times you have to modify them a little bit to fit your particular application. Even if they look similar, there might be slight differences. I know on one of them I had to change the linkage around a little bit on the choke arm. On a different one I had to change the linkage a little bit around on the throttle side of it to make it work for what I was using it on. And all in all, I just really prefer to rebuild the original carburetor if at all possible. So what we're going to do now that we got it all apart is we're going to blow through all of the little holes and crevices in it with the carburetor cleaner and the attached little directional straw that comes with it. And we're going to blow through all of these different little cracks and crevices. We're probably not going to take the metering arm out. This is the metering arm right here, this little silver lever. We're just going to push down on it and blow some carb cleaner through the intake port, and that will flush any dirt or debris out from around the needle and seat area. The other thing you want to check is to make sure that the metering arm is in the proper position. On most of these small engine carburetors, the tip of the metering arm right here should be level with the carburetor body here. The little valve right here is nice and clean. Sometimes dirt and debris clogs that tiny little hole up there. And the air hole for your impulse that runs your fuel pump needs to be clean too. And that is this hole here on the side of the carburetor, which collects air pressure or vacuum from the engine as the piston's moving up and down through this intake body here. And I'm going to clean that all out with my cleaner now, and we'll see what happens. Alright, I've done everything I said I was going to do. I've blown through everything here and cleaned everything out, and it seems like it worked pretty well. I also checked the final fuel filter. Right here is a little screen. You have to inspect that, make sure there's no dirt or fuzz build up in there. Sometimes a little bit of lint or fuzz will get built up in there, and it'll clog that screen up, and you won't get enough gas to let this thing run. So if you had a new carburetor kit, it would come with a new screen that you would press into place, but it seems like this one is okay. Now, the other thing, while we have it apart, we're going to take our T25 Torx bit, which I can find it here. And we're going to tighten up the base gasket plates like this on both sides. Make sure that that's nice and tight so there's no leaking going around. No leakage around where the base gasket and base plate here attached to the cylinder head. We're going to inspect our gasket right here and make sure that there's no dirt or debris on that gasket or no cracks in it. We're going to look down the hole there and inspect the piston to make sure there are no scratch marks or scoring on the piston from excess dirt or material breakdown of the metal inside getting in there. And the piston looks very clean. I can feel compression, pretty good compression as it pulls up to the top. I could actually get my compression gauge out and test the compression while we're here, but I'm almost 100% certain it's got good compression because it feels really hard to pull over like it always has. So I don't really think there's a problem with the compression. There we can see we've fit the carburetor back on exactly the same way it came off. And if we pump the primer button, we can see that the fuel is coming in from the top and going out from the bottom. The choke mechanism is working properly, so is the throttle trigger. So we are ready to put our air cleaner base and our air cleaner base and our protective adjustment cover back in place. The cover, just you pull this back a little bit like that, slide it over, and then drop it back down where it belongs. And the air cleaner cover is going to slide over the two little mounting studs like that. And then we're going to put the two nuts back on. As we put the nuts back on, we're going to lightly snug them down from side to side so we don't jam the carburetor on there in some sort of crooked fashion and cause it to leak around the base. So we're going to nice and secure, because you don't want these coming loose while you're cutting wood and letting dirt sneak in around behind this base plate. And that dirt is your enemy in any small two-cycle engine, or any engine really. And it's especially your enemy in a chainsaw, because these things are always surrounded by flying wood chips and dust and debris. So you want to make sure that you keep the intake system sealed up properly. And finally, we reattach the top cover plate, secure the three 22mm screws, and we're good to go. You have successfully cleaned or rebuilt your carburetor as necessary, whichever way you decide to do it. All that's left now is the final adjustment of the screws, and you should be good to go. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.